Alexander Reed exhaled slowly as he gazed at the Manhattan skyline from his penthouse balcony, swirling a glass of 30-year-old scotch that cost more than what most people earned in a month. At 32, he had conquered the business world with a ruthlessness and intelligence that left competitors bewildered, and financial publications scrambling to understand his meteoric rise. As the only child of one of Boston's oldest banking families, Alexander had been groomed since birth to take over the family empire. He'd exceeded every expectation, turning Reed Financial into a global powerhouse that handled investments for the world's elite. His calendar was perpetually filled with meetings in Dubai, London, and Singapore. His contacts included presidents, royalty, and celebrities who sought both his financial advice and his presence at their exclusive gatherings. Yet as he stood, overlooking the city that never sleeps, Alexander felt nothing but exhaustion. The parties had become monotonous displays of wealth. The business deals, once thrilling conquests, now felt like meaningless exchanges of numbers. The women who pursued him were interchangeable in their designer dresses and calculated charm, all seeking the status and security his name provided. "Mr. Reed," his assistant's voice interrupted his thoughts through the intercom. "Your car is ready for the gala." Alexander sighed, straightening his custom tuxedo. "Thank you, Emily. I'll be down in 5 minutes." Another night, another charity. Gala where the wealthy patted themselves on the back for donating money they'd never miss. He'd make the expected appearance, write a substantial check, and engage in the same hollow conversations he'd had 100 times before. 3 hours later, surrounded by New York's elite at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Alexander excused himself from a conversation with a senator's wife who had been not so subtly suggesting he meet her daughter. He found refuge in a quiet corner of the Egyptian exhibit, loosening his bow tie and checking his phone for messages that might provide a reasonable excuse to leave early. "Hiding from your admirers?" a voice asked, its tone more amused than accusatory. Alexander looked up to see a woman standing a few feet away, holding a champagne flute. She wore a simple black dress that stood out amid the evening's ostentatious displays of designer fashion. Her dark hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders, and her eyes, an unusual shade of amber, regarded him with undisguised curiosity. "More like hiding from myself," he replied, surprising himself with his honesty. She raised an eyebrow. "That's the most authentic thing I've heard anyone say all night." Something about her directness caught his attention. She wasn't trying to impress him, which in itself was a novelty. "I'm Alexander Reed," he said, extending his hand. "I know who you are," she replied, accepting his handshake briefly. "Everyone here does." "And you are?" Olivia Carter." She took a sip of her champagne, studying him over the rim of her glass. "So why is Alexander Reed, Boston banking royalty and darling of Wall Street, hiding in a museum exhibit when he should be networking with the city's power players?" "Perhaps I've had enough networking to last a lifetime," he answered, leaning against a display case. "What's your excuse? You don't seem to be working the room either." Olivia's lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm working, just not the room. I'm someone's +1 tonight." The implication was clear. Alex had encountered high-end escorts before. They were fixtures at events like these, accompanying wealthy businessmen who needed attractive companions for social appearances. But something about Olivia struck him as different. There was an intelligence in her gaze, a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with her role. "And your client?" he asked. "Abandoned me for a potential investor about 20 minutes ago," she said with a shrug. "Not that I mind. These events are tedious at best." "On that we can agree." Alexander glanced back toward the main hall, where laughter and the clink of glasses echoed. "What did you do before this?" He gestured vaguely. "Bold of you to assume." "There was a before," Olivia replied, her tone cooling slightly. "I should get back. My absence will be noticed eventually." As she turned to leave, Alexander acted on impulse, something he rarely did in his meticulously planned life. "Have dinner with me tomorrow." Olivia paused, looking back at him with surprise. "I don't think your reputation could handle being seen with someone like me in public." I don't care about my reputation. She laughed, the sound genuine and warm. Yes, you do. Men like you always do. Then not dinner, he persisted. Something else. A challenge. Her eyes narrowed with interest. What kind of challenge? 48 hours, he said, the idea forming as he spoke. 2 days for you two. Convince me there's more to life than this endless cycle of meaningless success. If you succeed, I'll... He paused, considering what he could offer that might interest her. I'll donate $1 million to any charity you choose. And what do you get out of this arrangement? Olivia asked, crossing her arms. Alexander considered this. What did he want? Not sex, that was too simple, too transactional. Authenticity, something real, no facades, no pretending. Olivia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. And if I fail? If, after 48 hours, you're still convinced your life is as empty as you claim, then you walk away richer for your time, and I continue my meaningless existence. She tilted her head, considering his offer. When would this challenge begin? Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, I'll have my driver pick you up. Olivia smiled, a flash of genuine amusement crossing her face. You don't even know where I live. Give me your number. I'll text you for the address. After a moment's hesitation, she recited her number, which Alexander stored in his phone. As she turned to leave again, he called after her. Why agree to this? You could make easier money elsewhere. Olivia glanced over her shoulder, her amber eyes locking with his. Maybe I'm curious to see if there's more to Alexander Reed than what appears in the financial pages. She took a few steps, then added, or maybe I just want to prove you wrong about something. Alexander watched her disappear into the crowd, feeling a flicker of something he hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he was genuinely curious about what tomorrow might bring. Back in his penthouse that night, he found himself restless, pacing the expansive living room as he questioned his impulsive decision. Olivia Carter was an unknown variable in his carefully controlled life, yet that was precisely what had drawn him to make the offer, the possibility of something unpredictable, something that couldn't be bought or negotiated. His phone chimed with a text message. 9 a.m. 27 Bedford Ave, Brooklyn. Come alone. No driver. Prostitute. Alexander smiled at the unexpected demand. Already she was challenging his expectations, refusing to play by his rules. Perhaps these 48 hours would be more interesting than he'd anticipated. As he finally drifted to sleep that night, Alexander found himself wondering about the mysterious woman with amber eyes and what secrets lay behind them. Little did he know that the next 2 days would completely transform his understanding of success, happiness, and his own heart. Alexander arrived at the address in Brooklyn precisely at 9, having dismissed his usual driver and taken a taxi instead. The neighborhood was a far cry from his Manhattan penthouse, a gentrifying area with a mix of renovated brownstones and older buildings awaiting transformation. Number 327 was a converted warehouse with large windows and an industrial aesthetic that spoke of artistic sensibilities rather than opulence. He pressed the buzzer for apartment 4B and waited, feeling oddly nervous. When Olivia opened the door, he was struck by how different she looked from the night before. Gone was the sleek black dress, replaced by faded jeans, a simple white t-shirt, and a denim jacket. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and her face was free of makeup. Somehow she looked even more striking. "You actually came," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "I keep my promises," Alexander replied, "though I admit this isn't what I expected." Olivia's apartment was spacious but sparsely furnished, with exposed brick walls covered in artwork, not the kind one purchased as investments, but vibrant. Emotional pieces that spoke of passion rather than value. Books lined makeshift shelves constructed from reclaimed wood, and a battered leather couch faced large windows that overlooked the street below. "What were you expecting? Some kind of high-end love nest?" She gestured around the space. "This is my actual home. Not many clients see it." "Why show it to me then?" Olivia tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You wanted authenticity. This is where it starts. She grabbed a worn leather backpack from a hook by the door. Ready for your first lesson in living? I've been alive for 32 years. I think I've got the basics down, he replied dryly. Existing isn't the same as living, Alexander. Come on. What followed was unlike any day Alexander had experienced before. Olivia led him through Brooklyn, bypassing tourist attractions in favor of hidden gems only locals knew. They ate breakfast at a tiny Ukrainian diner where the elderly owner greeted Olivia by name and insisted they try his wife's freshly baked bread. They explored a community garden tucked between buildings where Olivia knew every volunteer and the stories behind their carefully tended plots. How do you know all these places? Alexander asked as they walked along the waterfront, watching the Manhattan skyline from a different perspective. I grew up here, she answered, before gentrification made it trendy. My dad owned a hardware store on Flatbush Avenue for 30 years. And how did you end up? He trailed off, unsure how to phrase the question delicately. As a high-priced escort. Olivia finished for him, her tone matter-of-fact. That's a story for day 2 if you earn it. Throughout the day, Alexander found himself increasingly fascinated by Olivia. She engaged with everyone they encountered, from street vendors to musicians in the park, with genuine interest. She remembered names, asked about families, listened intently to stories. The connections she formed were authentic in a way that the networking Alexander had mastered was not. You're good with people, he observed, as they sat on a bench in Prospect Park, sharing a bag of roasted nuts purchased from a vendor Olivia had chatted with for 10 minutes. People are interesting when you actually pay attention to them, she replied, tossing a nut to a squirrel that had approached hopefully. Everyone has a story. Most people just want someone to hear it. Is that what you do for your clients? Listen to their stories? Olivia's expression shuttered slightly. Sometimes, often they prefer to create fictional versions of themselves, powerful, desirable men who need nothing and no one. Sound familiar? Alexander felt a flicker of discomfort at her accurate assessment. I don't need to create a fiction. My success speaks for itself. Does it? What exactly does it say? She turned to face him fully. What's the point of all your wealth and power if it leaves you standing alone at parties, hiding from conversations? I wasn't always like this, he said defensively. There was a time when the deals, the acquisitions, all of it felt meaningful. What changed? Alexander stared out at the park, watching children play on a distant playground. Nothing. Everything. I achieved every goal I set, reached every milestone, and discovered none of it mattered. What would matter then? Olivia asked softly. He struggled to answer, realizing he'd never really considered the question. I don't know. As evening approached, Olivia led him to a small jazz club tucked beneath an old theater. Unlike the polished venues Alexander frequented in Manhattan, this place was intimate and raw, with a small stage barely elevated above the closely packed tables. The music was exceptional, improvised and alive in a way that made the technically perfect performances at Lincoln Center seem sterile by comparison. Over drinks, Olivia gradually drew him out, asking questions about his childhood, his family's expectations, the weight of legacy he carried. Alexander found himself revealing things he'd never shared: his father's emotional distance, his mother's focus on appearances, his own loneliness as a child who was treated more as an heir than a son. So you became exactly what they wanted, Olivia observed, sipping her whiskey. The perfect successor. I exceeded their expectations, Alexander corrected. My father built a regional bank. I created a global financial empire. And yet here you are, challenging a stranger to show you why it all matters. Her amber eyes held his gaze steadily. What are you really looking for, Alexander? The question hung between them, impossible to deflect or dismiss with his usual practiced charm. For once, Alexander didn't have a calculated response ready. I want to feel something real, he finally admitted, something that can't be bought or sold or leveraged. Olivia's expression softened. That's a start. As the night grew late, they walked along the Brooklyn promenade, the lights of Manhattan glittering across the water. Alexander found himself wondering what his board of directors would think if they could see him now, wandering Brooklyn with a woman whose profession would scandalize their conservative sensibilities, discussing philosophy and purpose rather than profit margins. "You're smiling," Olivia noted. "What's funny?" "I'm imagining the heart attacks my executive team would have if they saw me right now." She laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Is Alexander Reed worried about his reputation?" "After all, not worried," he clarified. "Just aware of how trapped I've become in the life I built. Every decision scrutinized, every relationship analyzed for potential advantage or liability." "Is that why you're single? Too risky to let someone in?" The question struck closer to home than he expected. "Relationships are complicated in my position. People want access to what I have, not who I am." "And who are you, Alexander?" Olivia asked, stopping to lean against the railing. "Beyond the name, the money, the power, who is the man underneath it all?" He stood beside her, looking out at the city that had once represented everything he wanted to conquer. "I'm not sure I know anymore." "That," she said quietly, "is the most honest thing you've said all day." When Alexander returned to his penthouse that night, he felt strangely disoriented. The space that had always represented his success now seemed cold and impersonal, more like a luxury hotel suite than a home. He wandered through rooms filled with expensive furniture chosen by a decorator, artwork selected for investment potential rather than emotional resonance, and found himself wondering what Olivia would see here. His phone chimed with a message. "Day 1 complete. You survived Brooklyn without your security detail. Progress. Tomorrow 10 a.m. Wear something you don't mind getting dirty." "Oh." Alexander smiled at the screen, already looking forward to whatever challenge she had planned next. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely curious about what tomorrow might bring. Alexander arrived at Olivia's apartment the following morning, wearing the most casual clothes he owned, dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than most people's entire wardrobes. Olivia greeted him with an amused smile, her eyes taking in his attempt at something he didn't mind getting dirty. "We'll work with what we've got," she said, grabbing her backpack. "Come on, we're taking the subway." Alexander couldn't remember the last time he'd used public transportation. As they descended into the crowded station, he felt strangely exposed without the buffer of his usual privileges. Olivia navigated the system with ease, pulling him through the morning rush of commuters until they found seats on a Manhattan-bound train. "Where are we going?" he asked as the subway car rattled through the tunnel. "You'll see," she replied cryptically. Day 2 is about stripping away more layers. They emerged in Lower Manhattan and walked to a community center housed in an old brick building. Inside, the space buzzed with activity. Children in an art class, elderly people playing chess, teenagers huddled around computers. Olivia led him to a back room where a group of about 20 people sat in a circle of chairs. "What is this?" Alexander asked, suddenly wary. "A different kind of investment opportunity," Olivia answered, guiding him to a seat. The gathering turned out to be a support group for people rebuilding their lives after personal setbacks, addiction, financial disaster, trauma. Olivia greeted several members by name, and Alexander realized with surprise that she wasn't just bringing him here as an observer, she was a regular participant. For 2 hours, he listened as strangers shared their stories with raw honesty. A former Wall Street trader who had lost everything to cocaine addiction, a woman rebuilding her life after leaving an abusive relationship, a veteran struggling with PTSD. Olivia participated too, speaking briefly about her own journey of recovery, without going into specifics about what she was recovering from. Alexander sat in uncomfortable silence, feeling both intrusive and humbled. These people had none of his resources, none of his safety nets, yet they faced their struggles with a courage that made his own discontent seem trivial by comparison. After the meeting, they walked to a small park where food vendors lined the perimeter. Olivia bought them falafel wraps from a cart operated by a Syrian refugee family she knew by name. "Why did you take me there?" Alexander asked as they found a bench to eat their lunch. Because real connection happens when we're vulnerable, she replied, unwrapping her food. Those people in that room have nothing to hide anymore. They've hit bottom and survived it. Now they're rebuilding with authenticity. And you? What are you rebuilding from? Olivia took a bite of her falafel, considering him for a long moment before answering. I grew up comfortable, not wealthy like you, but secure. My parents worked hard to give me opportunities they never had. I went to NYU on scholarship, was on track for law school. She paused, her gaze distant. Then I met James during my senior year. Alexander listened as she described falling in love with a charismatic graduate student who had gradually isolated her from friends and family before revealing a darker side. What began as emotional manipulation escalated to financial control and eventually physical threats. I left with nothing but the clothes I was wearing, she continued, her voice steady despite the weight of the story. No degree, no money, no support system. He'd made sure of that. I'm sorry, Alexander said, genuinely moved by her disclosure. That must have been terrifying. It was, but it also taught me something valuable. I'm stronger than I knew. Olivia crumpled her wrapper, tossing it into a nearby trash can. I tried conventional jobs, but I was always looking over my shoulder, afraid he'd find me. Then I met Sophia, who ran a high-end escort service. She offered me control, anonymity, and financial independence. So it was a choice, Alexander observed, trying to understand. A survival choice initially, then a deliberate one. Olivia met his gaze directly. I set the terms, I choose the clients, I maintain my boundaries. For the first time since James, I had power over my own life. Alexander found himself reassessing everything he'd assumed about her profession. And the support group? Trauma leaves marks that don't fade easily, she said simply. We're all healing from something. The afternoon took them to a community garden in the East Village, where Olivia had been volunteering for years. They spent hours working alongside local residents, planting seedlings and building new raised beds. Alexander, despite his initial awkwardness, found unexpected satisfaction in the physical labor and the easy camaraderie of the diverse group. Your hands are blistering, Olivia noted as they took a water break, probably never done manual labor before. Alexander examined his palms, surprised by the reddened skin. Not since a summer sailing camp when I was 12, he admitted. My father thought it would build character. Did it? Mostly it taught me I preferred air conditioning. He smiled, then grew serious. But this is different. There's something rewarding about creating something tangible, something that will grow. As evening approached, they helped serve dinner at a shelter where Olivia volunteered monthly. Alexander found himself in the unfamiliar position of serving others rather than being served. The people who came through the line were diverse, some clearly homeless, others just struggling to make ends meet in an increasingly expensive city. Mark. Olivia greeted a middle-aged man with a weathered face. How's the job search going? Got an interview tomorrow, the man replied, his pride evident. That resume you helped me with opened some doors. Throughout the evening, Alexander witnessed similar exchanges. Olivia knew many of the people by name, remembered details about their lives, celebrated their small victories. What struck him most was the genuine respect with which she treated everyone, regardless of their circumstances. You're good at this, he observed, as they cleaned up after the dinner service. At serving food, she asked, wiping down tables. At seeing people, Alexander clarified. Really seeing them. Olivia paused, considering his words. It's not a skill. It's just basic humanity. Later, they walked along the High Line, the elevated park built on an old railway line. The spring evening was cool but pleasant, the city lights creating a backdrop that even Alexander, who had grown jaded to Manhattan's views, found beautiful. You spend your free time helping others, he observed. Why not leverage that into a career? You could work for a non-profit, make a difference without selling my body, Olivia finished, her tone sharpening. Is that how you see what I do? I didn't mean... Yes, you did. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Despite everything I've shared, you still see my profession as something shameful, something I should want to escape. That's not fair, Alexander protested. I'm trying to understand. No, you're trying to fix what you perceive as broken, classic wealthy man syndrome, thinking money can solve everything. Her amber eyes flashed with indignation. Has it occurred to you that I might be exactly where I want to be? That I made choices that work for me? The conversation had veered into uncomfortable territory, revealing assumptions Alexander hadn't realized he was making. He took a deep breath, trying to see beyond his own biases. You're right, he admitted finally. I'm sorry I've been judging your choices through my own privileged lens. His apology seemed to surprise her. Olivia's expression softened slightly. Most men in your position never acknowledge when they're wrong. I'm learning, Alexander leaned against the railing, looking out over the city. All my life I've been taught there's a correct path to success. The right schools, the right connections, the right acquisitions. Deviating wasn't an option. And now? Now I'm standing on an old railway track with a woman who's challenging everything I thought I knew about value and worth. He turned to her. You've survived things that would break most people, Olivia. Instead of being destroyed by it, you've built a life on your own terms. That takes incredible strength. Something shifted in her expression, a wall coming down, perhaps. Thank you for seeing that, she said quietly. They continued walking, the conversation turning to lighter topics. Favorite books, travel experiences, childhood memories. As they talked, Alexander found himself increasingly drawn to her intelligence, her resilience, her unique perspective on a world he'd viewed through a much narrower lens. When he finally returned to his penthouse that night, Alexander found himself standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows, seeing his reflection superimposed over the city lights. Behind him, the trappings of his success, the designer furniture, the rare art, the technology that cost more than most people's annual salaries, suddenly seemed like props in a play rather than extensions of his identity. His phone chimed with a message from Olivia. Final day tomorrow. 8 p.m, dress formally. I'll text the address in the morning. Sleep well, Alexander. As he prepared for bed, he realized something unsettling. Their 48 hours were more than half gone, and he wasn't ready for this exploration to end. Whatever challenge Olivia had planned for their final evening, Alexander knew with growing certainty that it would leave him changed in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. Alexander spent the following day distracted. He moved through meetings mechanically, his mind repeatedly drifting to Olivia. His executive team noticed his unusual detachment, but attributed it to fatigue from his recent international travels. In reality, he was counting the hours until 8 o'clock. The address Olivia sent that morning was for a building in Tribeca, an area Alexander knew well from business dinners and gallery openings. The specified location, however, was unfamiliar, a discreet entrance with only a small brass plaque reading, The Labyrinth. When he arrived that evening in his tuxedo, a doorman examined him with practiced indifference before checking a tablet. Mr. Reed, you're expected. He opened the door, revealing a narrow hallway with deep red walls that led to an elevator operated by a white-gloved attendant. The elevator descended several floors below street level, opening onto a space that momentarily took Alexander's breath away. The Labyrinth was aptly named, a series of interconnected rooms designed like a modern interpretation of a Venetian palace. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over velvet furnishings, while mirrors strategically placed throughout created illusions of endless space. A hostess in a crimson gown approached. "Ms. Carter is waiting for you in the Peacock Room," she said, gesturing for him to follow. They wound through crowded rooms filled with people in formal attire, engaged in intimate conversations. Alexander noticed there were no phones visible, a rarity in modern New York, and the music was live, provided by musicians scattered throughout the venue. The Peacock Room was smaller than the others, its walls covered in iridescent wallpaper that shimmered like feathers in the candlelight. Olivia stood by a window that overlooked an interior courtyard, her back to him as she spoke with an elderly gentleman who kissed her hand before departing. When she turned, Alexander felt a physical jolt of appreciation. She wore a floor-length gown in a deep emerald that complemented her amber eyes. Her dark hair swept up to reveal the elegant line of her neck. This was Olivia in her professional element, poised, sophisticated, and undeniably magnetic. "Alexander," she greeted him, her smile genuine despite the formal setting. "Welcome to my world." "It's not what I expected," he admitted, taking in the surroundings. "What did you expect? Something more tawdry?" Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "Honestly, I didn't know what to expect." He accepted a champagne flute from a passing server. "What exactly is this place?" "A private club. Very exclusive. Very discreet. People come here to be themselves without judgment or phones capturing every moment." She took his arm, guiding him through the space. "Some come for business connections, some for romance, some just to escape the performance of their daily lives." As they moved through the rooms, Alexander noticed how differently Olivia carried herself here, confident but approachable, greeting members with the perfect balance of familiarity and respect. She was clearly valued in this environment, not just for her beauty, but for her discretion and intelligence. "Many of these people would be recognized anywhere else," she explained quietly. "CEOs, politicians, artists, here they can have conversations they couldn't have anywhere else." "And your role?" Alexander asked, watching as she exchanged warm greetings with a woman he recognized as a Supreme Court justice. "I'm a companion, a confidant, sometimes just a friendly face." Olivia led him to a secluded alcove with comfortable seating. "The oldest profession isn't just about sex, Alexander. It's about connection, validation, being seen." "Is that what your clients want? To be seen?" "Most people do, don't they?" She countered. "Behind all the power and success, there's usually someone longing for understanding." Alexander thought about his own life, the endless pursuit of achievements that had left him feeling increasingly hollow. "Yes," he admitted. "I suppose they do." Throughout the evening, Olivia introduced him to various members of the club, a celebrated author who discussed philosophy rather than his work, a tech mogul who spoke passionately about ancient poetry, a famous actress who wanted to debate economic theory rather than discuss her latest film. In this hidden space, they shed the identities that defined them publicly and revealed aspects of themselves rarely seen. "They trust you," Alexander observed, after a particularly revealing conversation with a federal judge who had shared his concerns about the justice system. "I don't betray confidences," Olivia replied simply. "In a world where everything is potential leverage, discretion is invaluable." "Is that why you brought me here? To show me people are more than their public personas?" Olivia considered this. "Partly, but also to show you that meaning comes from authentic connection, something many powerful people sacrifice in pursuit of success." As midnight approached, a string quartet began playing in the central room, and couples moved to dance. Olivia extended her hand to Alexander. "Our final lesson," she said with a smile. He took her hand, leading her to the dance floor with the practiced ease of someone who had attended countless charity galas. As they moved together, Alexander was acutely aware of her proximity, the subtle fragrance of her perfume, the warmth of her hand in his. "You dance well," she observed. "Years of obligatory lessons," he replied. "Another skill acquired for social advancement rather than pleasure." "And now, are you advancing something or finding pleasure?" Alexander met her gaze, suddenly aware of how much had changed in just 2 days. "Both, perhaps, though not in ways I anticipated." As they continued dancing, the conversation deepened. Olivia shared more about her journey, how she had rebuilt herself after escaping her abusive relationship, the therapy that had helped her reclaim her sense of worth, the boundaries she maintained to ensure her work remained a choice rather than a trap. "The irony," she said as they moved across the floor, "is that I probably have healthier relationships than most people. Everything is negotiated explicitly. No hidden expectations, no unspoken resentments." "That sounds more honest than most marriages I've witnessed," Alexander admitted, thinking of his parents' coldly efficient partnership. "Honesty is underrated," Olivia agreed. "Tell me honestly then, Has our 48 hours changed anything? For you? Alexander considered the question carefully. Yes, he said finally. You've shown me communities I never knew existed, connections I never valued, perspectives I never considered. You've made me question everything I thought I knew about success and fulfillment. And your emptiness, the void that led you to propose this challenge? Still there, he admitted, but different somehow, more like potential space than emptiness. Olivia's expression softened. That's a start. As the evening progressed, they found themselves in a quiet corner of the club, sharing stories that went beyond surface details. Alexander told her about the crushing pressure of family expectations, his father's emotional absence, the moment he realized his spectacular success had brought him no joy. Olivia spoke of her dreams before they were derailed, her struggle to trust again, her determination to live authentically despite society's judgments. You could do anything, you know, Alexander said. With your intelligence, your insight, your ability to connect with people, any field would be lucky to have you. Are we back to saving me from my profession? Olivia asked, though her tone was gentle rather than defensive. No, Alexander clarified. I'm not suggesting you need saving. I'm recognizing your capabilities. There's a difference. She studied him for a moment. There is, and I appreciate that you can see it now. She glanced at her watch. It's nearly 2 in the morning. Our 48 hours ends in 7 hours. We still have time, Alexander said, surprising himself with his reluctance to see their arrangement conclude. Olivia smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. Time for what, Alexander? What exactly are you looking for now? The question hung between them, loaded with implications. Alexander realized with sudden clarity that somewhere during their brief time together, his interest had shifted from an intellectual challenge to something more personal. But admitting that felt dangerous, more risky than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. I'm not sure, he answered honestly. I just know I'm not ready for this to end. Olivia's expression became guarded. This was an arrangement, Alexander. A challenge with clear parameters. Extending it complicates things. How so? She sighed, leaning back in her seat. Because I have rules, professional boundaries, and you... She paused, choosing her words carefully. You're used to getting what you want, to buying what you desire. That's not fair, Alexander protested. I've never suggested... You don't have to suggest, Olivia interrupted. It's the natural conclusion. Wealthy man meets escort, becomes intrigued, wants to make her his exclusive companion. It's a cliché for a reason. Her words stung, partly because Alexander recognized the truth in them. Before meeting Olivia, he might have seen their interaction exactly as she described, a transaction he could control through financial means. What if that's not what I want? He asked quietly. Then, what do you want? Alexander struggled to articulate feelings he was only beginning to understand. I want to keep learning from you. I want to see the world through your eyes. I want... He hesitated, then finished. I want to know if what I'm feeling is real or just the novelty of someone challenging my perspective. Olivia studied him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face for sincerity. Finally, she reached across the table and took his hand, her touch sending an unexpected current through him. Alexander, she said gently, you don't even know me. Not really. You've seen carefully selected aspects of my life over 2 days. That's not enough to make any kind of decision about what you want. Then let me know you, he pressed, beyond our 48 hours. And what about my profession, my choices? Could you really accept them? The question forced Alexander to confront his own biases. Could he accept a relationship with someone whose work involved intimacy with others? Or would jealousy and conventional expectations eventually poison whatever connection they might build? I don't know, he admitted. I'd like to think I'm evolving beyond my prejudices, but I can't promise I wouldn't struggle. At least you're honest about it. Olivia withdrew her hand, her expression thoughtful. Tell me something, Alexander. In these 2 days, have you thought about propositions, about trying to buy my affection or my time? Initially, yes, he confessed, knowing honesty was the only path forward. It's how I've been conditioned to think, that everything has a price, but now I understand why that would be wrong, why it would undermine everything you've shown me about authentic connection. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. Good, because I would have walked away immediately. As the club began to empty, they made their way back to the surface world. Outside, the pre-dawn air was cool and quiet, the streets of New York momentarily peaceful. I should get home, Olivia said, her professional demeanor returning slightly. Our challenge concludes at 9. Can I see you at 9 then for your verdict? Alexander asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Meet me at Riverside Park at the 79th Street entrance, 9 o'clock. Before he could respond, she kissed him lightly, on the cheek, a gesture that felt more intimate than any physical encounter he'd experienced before, then stepped into a waiting taxi. As Alexander watched the cab disappear into the early morning traffic, he felt an unfamiliar sensation, vulnerability. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, he couldn't predict or control what would happen next. The outcome mattered, to him in a way that business deals and financial successes never had. Back in his penthouse, Alexander stood at his window watching the sunrise illuminate the city. In 48 hours, Olivia had dismantled his carefully constructed worldview, showing him depths of experience his privileged life had never exposed him to. She had challenged him to see value beyond wealth, connection beyond transaction, meaning beyond achievement. But more unsettling than all of that was the realization that he was falling for her, not as a conquest or a curiosity, but as a woman whose strength and perspective had awakened something long dormant within him. In less than 7 hours, he would learn if their connection was enough to bridge the vastly different worlds they inhabited. For once in his life, Alexander Reed had no strategy, no backup plan, no leverage to ensure a favorable outcome. All he had was hope, and the growing conviction that whatever happened next would irrevocably change the course of his life. Alexander arrived at Riverside Park 20 minutes early, his normally confident demeanor replaced by an uncharacteristic nervousness. He'd spent hours contemplating what he would say to Olivia, how he might articulate the transformation he'd undergone during their brief time together. For once, his Harvard business education and years of high-stakes negotiations hadn't prepared him for a conversation that mattered. The park was coming alive with morning joggers, dog walkers, and parents pushing strollers. Alexander found a bench overlooking the Hudson River, watching sunlight dance across the water as boats moved slowly along the current. The beauty of this everyday scene struck him with unexpected force. Had such simple pleasures always been available to him? Unnoticed amid his pursuit of bigger, more prestigious achievements? At precisely 9 o'clock, he spotted Olivia walking toward him. She looked different again today, neither the sophisticated escort from the club nor the casual Brooklyn resident from their first day. She wore a simple sundress and cardigan, her hair loose around her shoulders, looking like any other New Yorker enjoying a spring morning. "You're punctual," she observed, taking a seat beside him on the bench. "My father's first lesson in business," Alexander replied. "Respecting other people's time demonstrates your own value." "Interesting framing," Olivia said, "making even courtesy transactional." Alexander smiled ruefully. "I never questioned it before." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a sailboat glide past. Finally, Olivia turned to him. "So our 48 hours are complete. Have I succeeded in showing you that life has meaning beyond your cycle of meaningless success?" she asked, echoing his words from their first meeting. Alexander considered carefully before answering. "Yes," he said finally, "but not in the way I expected." "How so?" "I thought you might show me some profound philosophical truth or spiritual revelation," he admitted. "Instead, you showed me connection, to communities, to purpose, to authenticity. You showed me that what I've been missing isn't some abstract meaning but genuine human relationships." Olivia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And the $1 million donation? Which charity have I earned it for?" "Any you choose," Alexander replied, "though I'd suggest the women's shelter we visited. They seem to be doing important work. They are, Olivia agreed. But I'd prefer you direct the money to the community garden project. They're trying to expand to more neighborhoods, create green spaces where children can learn about growing food. Consider it done. I'll have the transfer made today. Alexander hesitated, then added, but I'd like to do more than just write a check. I'd like to get involved personally, maybe join the board, offer business expertise. Olivia's eyebrows rose in surprise. That's not what I expected from you. I'm not the same person I was 48 hours ago. Alexander turned to face her directly. Which brings me to what I really want to say. Our arrangement is complete, but I'd like to see you again, Olivia. Not as part of a challenge, not as a client, but as... He paused, searching for the right words. As someone who values who you are and wants to explore whatever this connection between us might become. Olivia's expression remained carefully neutral. Alexander, I told you last night, my profession makes conventional relationships complicated. I'm not asking for conventional, he replied. I'm asking for a chance to know you better, without expectations or judgments. And my work. Alexander had thought long and hard about this. I won't pretend it wouldn't be difficult for me. I've been conditioned by society's views, just like everyone else. But I respect your choices and your autonomy. Whatever relationship we might build would have to accommodate that reality, at least initially. Initially? Olivia caught the qualification in his statement. I'm being honest, Alexander said. I can't predict how I'll feel in the future. I can only promise to communicate openly and never try to control your choices. Olivia studied him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face. You're different from most men I've known, she said finally. Most would either try to save me or treat me as a temporary diversion. I'm trying to see you as you are, Alexander replied. A complex, intelligent woman who has made difficult choices and built a life on her own terms. She smiled, genuine, warmth reaching her eyes. That's a good start. So is that a yes? Will you see me again? Instead of answering directly, Olivia reached into her bag and pulled out a small worn notebook. I've been keeping this for years, she explained, opening it to reveal pages filled with handwritten notes. Whenever I encounter something that moves me, a quote, a moment, an insight, I write it down. It's my personal map of meaning. She turned to a specific page and read aloud. Perhaps the most valuable outcome of all education is the ability to make yourself do the thing you have to do, when it ought to be done, whether you like it or not. That's one of my guiding principles, taking control of my life, making deliberate choices rather than passive ones. Alexander listened, understanding she was sharing something deeply personal with him, a glimpse into her internal compass. What does that have to do with us? He asked gently. Everything, Olivia replied. I'm at a crossroads. The path of least resistance would be to walk away from whatever this is developing between us. It's complicated, potentially painful, definitely unpredictable. She closed the notebook, returning it to her bag. But I've never chosen the easy path when a more meaningful one was available. Hope flared in Alexander's chest. And which path are you choosing now? Olivia took a deep breath. I'm choosing to explore this connection. With conditions. First, we take it slowly. No grand gestures, no attempting to rearrange either of our lives. Second, complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. And third, no financial entanglements of any kind between us. Agreed, Alexander said immediately, on all counts. There's one more thing you should know, Olivia added, her expression turning serious. I've been considering a change for some time now, before I met you. What kind of change? I recently completed my law school applications, she revealed. I never finished my degree after leaving James. Now I'm ready. 3 schools in New York have accepted me for the fall semester. Alexander felt a surge of admiration. That's incredible, Olivia. You'd make an amazing attorney. It would mean transitioning away from my current work, she continued. Not because it's shameful or wrong, but because law school is demanding and I want to focus fully on that challenge. I understand, Alexander said, careful not to show too much relief, lest she interpret it as judgment of her choices. Would you Would you let me support your decision? Not financially, he added quickly, seeing her expression change. I mean emotionally, as someone who believes in you. Olivia's features softened. I'd like that. She reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. The simple gesture felt more intimate than Alexander could have imagined, a connection forged through vulnerability rather than expectation. So, where do we go from here? He asked. How about we start with breakfast? Olivia suggested with a smile. There's a little place near Columbia that makes incredible blueberry pancakes. Student hangout, nothing fancy. Sounds perfect, Alexander replied, realizing he meant it. The prospect of a simple breakfast in a university cafe with Olivia held more appeal than any exclusive restaurant reservation or VIP experience he could arrange. As they walked through the park toward Broadway, Alexander felt a lightness he hadn't experienced since childhood. The burden of expectations, of constant performance, of maintaining the perfect image, seemed to lift with each step. Beside him, Olivia pointed out details he might have overlooked. A family of ducks in the pond, an elderly couple dancing silently to music only they could hear, a street musician whose saxophone filled the air with soulful notes. Over breakfast, they began the delicate process of planning a future that accommodated both their worlds. Alexander would continue his work at Reed Financial, but with a renewed focus on ethical investment and community impact. Olivia would prepare for law school while gradually transitioning from her current profession. They would meet somewhere, in the middle, building a relationship based on mutual respect and growing understanding. It won't be easy, Olivia cautioned as they lingered over coffee. Your world and mine, they don't typically intersect this way. Maybe they should, Alexander replied. Maybe the barriers between different lives, different experiences, are part of what keeps us all isolated. Olivia smiled at his philosophical turn. Look at you, getting all existential over pancakes. I had a good teacher, he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. In the weeks and months that followed, their relationship developed with careful intention. Alexander immersed himself in Olivia's Brooklyn community, volunteering alongside her at the garden and shelter. Olivia gradually met select friends from his world, those Alexander trusted not to judge or gossip. They navigated difficult conversations about her past and his privilege, about the societal structures that had shaped both their lives in vastly different ways. There were challenges, of course. Alexander sometimes struggled with jealousy as Olivia completed her professional commitments, though he worked hard to examine and overcome these reactions. Olivia occasionally grew frustrated with the entitlement she encountered in Alexander's social circles, the casual disregard for struggles they had never experienced. But through it all, they maintained their commitment to honesty and mutual respect. By the time Olivia began her first semester at Columbia Law School that fall, they had built a foundation strong enough to weather the transitions ahead. Alexander had restructured his work schedule to create space for what truly mattered, delegating more responsibility to his executive team while focusing his own efforts on a new initiative, a foundation dedicated to economic empowerment in underserved communities. On a crisp October evening, they returned to Riverside Park, to the same bench where they had decided to give their relationship a chance. The trees blazed with autumn colors, and the setting sun painted the Hudson in shades of gold and crimson. I have something for you, Alexander said, reaching into his pocket. Olivia looked at him suspiciously. If that's a ring, it's too soon. He laughed. Not a ring, something else. He handed her a small leather-bound notebook, similar to the one she had shown him months before. When she opened it, she found the first page inscribed with his handwriting, My Personal Map of Meaning, inspired by Olivia Carter. Tears welled in her eyes as she flipped through the pages, finding thoughtful reflections on moments they had shared, insights he had gained, questions he was still exploring. The final entry read, The true measure of wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you're willing to share, not just resources, but vulnerability, growth, and authentic connection. Alexander, she whispered, visibly moved. This is beautiful. Asked me once what would matter to me, he reminded her. Now I know. This matters. Being fully present in my own life, making deliberate choices about what I value, building connections that challenge and strengthen me. He took her hand. You matter, Olivia. And you matter to me, she replied, leaning in to kiss him softly. As they sat together watching darkness fall over the city, Alexander reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just 6 months. The emptiness that had once consumed him had been replaced by purpose, connection, and a different kind of success, one measured not in dollars or deals, but in moments of genuine meaning. His world was no longer defined by what he owned or achieved, but by how fully he lived and loved. And for that transformation, he had Olivia to thank, the woman who had accepted his challenge and in the process challenged him to become something better than he had ever imagined possible. The 48 hours that had begun as a desperate attempt to find meaning had extended into a lifetime of discovery, proving that true wealth lay not in the accumulation of success, but in the courage to pursue authentic connection, even when it led down unexpected paths. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Alexander and Olivia walked hand in hand toward their future, two people from different worlds who had found in each other the courage to live with open hearts. Fin de Historia. Dear listeners, we hope Alexander and Olivia's journey has touched your heart as deeply as it has touched ours. Their story reminds us that true connections can bridge even the most different worlds, and that authentic relationships require courage, honesty, and a willingness to see beyond our assumptions. If you've enjoyed this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it by clicking to your left. Please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if you'd like to hear more stories that explore life's complexities. We bring unique narratives like this one every day, each designed to inspire and move you. We look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments section below.